What is DEI? What is the roots and the history of this program? What is the diversity, equity, and inclusion? What is this all about? Why is there a need for these type of program in the Western world? Stay tuned, my people. Watch this video and we will dig deeper into what exactly is the DEI and why the ruling class, the oligarchies, the major corporations, including the new administration of the government of America, all opposed to DEI. Why? We are going to dig deeper and we're going to find out the reason why. Tune into this video with Brother Dulani as we explore the real reason for this opposition to DEI. Now, thank you for watching Clear Thinking. Let's go. In order for us to get a clear understanding of what DEI is, we have to look at the history of capitalism, the history of imperialism, and also the history of white supremacy. The Western world, particularly in the last 500 years, was built on the backs of the non-white, non-European people of this world. The lands of non-European, non-white people were stolen. It was plundered. It was taken by conquest, by genocide. All across the Western world, all of the Americas, from North America, Central America, South America. It was practically taken, strangled, manhandled, strong arm, and was taken by genocide, by blood, by sweat, and by tears. They marched forward under this ideology of manifest destiny, and they have conquered a tremendous piece of real estate. And in the process, they have went into Africa, and they have kidnapped and brought millions of Africans to the Western world, into the Americas, and used African blood, sweat, tears, labor to build the Western Empire. They have accumulated trillions upon trillions of dollars in wealth and assets. But one of the main feature of this system, because make no mistake about it, the whole operation was a criminal enterprise. It was a racketeering and it was a conspiracy between European nations against non-European nations to enslave, to genocide, to colonize non-European people. Now, the key feature of this is that wealth was being created and transferred to one group of people, those who own the means of production, those who own the major corporation, those who consider themselves owners of the land and owners of the minerals and the resources that was found on those land when they came in and invaded those land and took those land from the indigenous people in those lands, on those lands. The wealth that was created, the power that was accumulated from all that process was in the hands of one set of people. And throughout that whole process, there have been a resistance, a struggle of the people that was exploited. And we're talking about particularly African people, as well as indigenous people, and also working class and poor white people eventually along in the struggle. But we must stay focused. African people have been resisting this bare, raw exploitation, wrapped in racism, on the ideology that Europeans and white people make you intrinsically more intelligent, endowed you with some type of superiority over non-European. And that gave you some kind of privilege, some kind of right. So you can benefit from the resources of this world, from the productivity and the industrialization of this world. Only your people should benefit. And African people should be enslaved and should be colonized and be used as tools for your own achievement. However, African people have always resisted, always fought for their freedom, for their liberation against this system. And as a result, with the conflict, even between Europeans, over how to go about building wealth in America, there was those who wanted to use free labor, which is to utilize African people exclusively for free labor. And then there was the factories of the North of America who wanted to continue that. And then they had issues competing because they had to pay their white workers in the factory against the plantocracy who was using free labor on the plantation. Eventually, it led to a civil war in America to abolish the whole, breaking apart of the Union and to bring the Union back into one and to continue capitalism. African people used it as an opportunity to liberate themselves, and as a result, the Emancipation Proclamation was declared, and African people was able to secure their freedom through that process. After that process, there was a period called Reconstruction era in America, and it was that era was used to try to help African people get a foothold on the economic ladder. So they agreed to bring in federal troops into the southern areas where African people was predominantly enslaved, and that was used to keep the African people from being terrorized, because there are a lot of the white supremacists who were still existing in the South, and African people, the African Americans who were enslaved in America, they was left landless, penniless, no food, no clothes, nothing to take care of themselves, and they were at the mercy of this very same plantocracy that had previously had enslaved them. There were no safety for African people. And despite all this, African people endured. Our African ancestors endured and fought for something to get a little foothold. And even those towns and cities that was built by African people were actually invaded and tore down and demolished because of one thing: the white people of America. So people racialized as white people. They're actually European descendant people in America. They decided that Africans or non-Europeans should not share in the accumulation of wealth. In many cases, they became envious and jealous of African people who was progressing just after slavery. And they did everything they can to abolish that, to push back on that, to try to keep African people in their place. And this was the first form of what you call trying to create some kind of diversity in America, some kind of equity in America, some kind of inclusion of other people in America was birthed in that process. Where here's now people have been so-called, they liberated themselves, they want a piece of the pie. Their ancestors have toiled for hundreds of years to build this empire in America, and all they're asking for is just the opportunity now to benefit from some of this. And they were opposed to it then. Eventually, they abandoned African people in the South. And as a result, the Southern plantocracy, they terrorized African people, run them out of town, lynch them. All manner of evil was committed against African people. There was no sanctuary. But African people keep fighting and keep struggling until, they started to migrate out of the South and started moving to the North, all over America, looking for, even internationally, looking for opportunity. Because they wanted to share in the wealth. They wanted to be, compensated for their work. And they was opposed. The dominant society opposed it. in those times. It took all the way until, 1868 before African Americans were recognized as citizens in America. Because according to the dominant society, we were not human enough to be granted citizenship. We were not civilized enough to be granted citizenship. We didn't deserve of citizenship. So they tried to deny even that as an element of inclusion was opposed. Every step of the way that African people was fighting for the liberation to be granted some of this wealth, just the opportunity to accumulate some of this wealth for themselves, they were always denied. And no matter how intelligent, no matter how skilled and gifted an African person was, they were still being looked at sideways and still being looked down on. But they still fought. Our ancestors never gave up. We kept on fighting. We kept on struggling. And, a lot of our people were stuck on the land in America as sharecroppers, and even that was a fiasco. It was a whole racketeering. It was a conspiracy against African people again. I tell you, America, it was truly a criminal enterprise. And they used every means to keep African people as a permanent underclass because they refuse to open up opportunities to African people. They refuse to allow African people to develop to their full potential. Every effort was pursued to keep African people from expanding, from growing, from being included in the development to be included in the beneficiary of the wealth that America has accumulated. They did everything in their power. Then it culminated up until this 1960s, the 50s and 60s, where African people were still fighting for their liberation, for inclusion, for America to accept African people. And there was different views. There was some that was opposed to that. Said was African people who didn't feel that we should be asking for inclusion or fighting to be included amongst America, that we should return to Africa and build our own. But the majority of Africans in America chose to go the way of inclusion, which is another way of saying integration, to be integrated into the society of America, the dominant society. And that was opposed. They had to fight tooth and nail to get those civil rights laws passed to allow African children to get quality education, because everything was about denying African people from getting the same quality education, the same amount of resources, the same amount of opportunity that white people were getting. There was a deliberate attack on that. There was a deliberate push against that, as if African people were not deserving of the opportunity to pursue their full potential. And that has been the history of America, the denial of non-European, non-white, the opportunity to accumulate wealth. And in the last, say, 30 years, there's been a big thrust. Probably even 40 years, there's been a big push with a thing called affirmative action. Affirmative action was pushed, particularly with Jimmy Carter and that administration. They was able to push through some affirmative action to say, look at this. America knows, every historian in America knows that African people was held back, was deliberately held back and was held behind. And European was practically 300 to 400 years ahead of African people because they were the only one benefiting from the wealth that was being produced in America. They don't want to talk about this part. And so they all came to some kind of understanding that, listen, we need to do something very deliberate to try to help African people to speed up their development, to speed up their growth. And European still was opposed to that. But some of them came around to the idea, and then the affirmative action program, where it was requiring corporations and government institutions and all across the board to create some provision to allow African people, African Americans, to be included, non-European, women, disabled, everybody to be included in the wealth, the accumulation of the wealth, the sharing of the wealth. And that was the birth of this governmental policy to push for these type of programs, to encourage corporation and individual to share the opportunity. And that was opposed until eventually they was able to overturn that. And then it morphed itself into this now, the fancy term that everyone is using now called DEI. DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many corporate, it sounds better than affirmative action. It sounds very intellectual and very sophisticated. So a lot of companies adapted it, saying, oh yeah, we need to be more diverse. We need to have more women. We need to have more men. And some people say, we need to even include disabled and other people, big people, little people, all kind of people. But the common denominator was that everyone had to be qualified. You couldn't, you don't hire somebody that's not qualified. We're saying that if everybody's qualified, you got to give every group in the community a chance. Because if you are picking only qualified candidate from one group, you're going to have one set of people benefiting from the accumulation of wealth. Because that's the key to all of this, is the wealth, the sharing of wealth and power. It has been felt for many centuries. It's been ingrained in the American psyche that Europeans are better, that white ice is colder. It is always this idea that, white people should be the one naturally entitled to the wealth and the power in America. And that there should be a gatekeeping against who get access to this wealth and access to this power. But there's been a counterforce who has been pushing for others to be included in this wealth. Because what you're going to do, you're going to continue to perpetuate the inequality that exists between the different groups of people in America. And as a result, DEI was adopted fairly widespread across society, and it was cool. But then there are those in America who felt that it was going too far. They felt that this is now getting out of hand. We need to put a stop to this, because somehow they're feeling in their psyche that white people are under threat, white male in particular. Because if you examine these DEI programs, even affirmative action programs, the main beneficiary were white women. Because in these programs, white woman was considered to be an excluded group. Even though white women benefited from the opportunities that white men had, naturally by default, she was okay with anything. But then in order to get the laws then passed quicker, they included white women as a category. So women became a category, and white woman was able to benefit from the contracts, from the hiring, from all these things to be more inclusive in a company. They would hire more women instead of just hiring just white men. They were, many corporations, many companies were hiring a lot of women, and then some of them would hire a black woman that would tick the two box, woman and black. So that was done. But now they are now attacking DEI and saying DEI is unacceptable and DEI need to be challenged and DEI need to be eliminated. But now today, my people, you see, DEI is about wealth. It's about who owns what. It's about who will be entitled to benefit from the opportunities that exist in America. Yes, my people. So now we can understand that DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there are forces who are opposed to sharing the wealth and the power in the Western world. They want to keep it white and keep it male. And that is what's going on here. There is a fear that non-white people are coming to take power and take the wealth and even take white women away from white men. And as you can see with the campaign in the right wing, conservative agenda is now picking up steam across the Western world, and it's been driven by fear and hatred of non-white people, immigrants, those who are coming to take the wealth, those who are coming to take our power. And so that is the reason why they're opposed to DEI. And I hope you've gotten something out of this video. Do watch, do share it, and do comment about this. we need to understand what DEI really is and what it's about. It's about wealth.